Drew, will you introduce yourself? Tell everyone about your background. Tell them what you're working on, and then we'll jump into a little bit of your story with panic attacks.
Sure. So I'm Drew Linslata. I'm the creator and host of the Anxious Truth podcast. I started in all of this just because I had 25 years of my life where I used to struggle with on and off panic disorder. I was agoraphobic. I had panic disorder. I probably had diagnosable OCD several times, pretty deep clinical depression. That went cyclically on and off for like 25 years. I told that whole story in like a free book and everything. And when I finally got my act together and really sort of overcame the whole thing back in like 2005, 2006, I made some friends on fledgling YouTube. We would exchange like exposure videos and cheer for each other.
Yeah.
I got better. And I'm like, well, I should probably maybe pay this forward into the universe. I started a podcast in 2014 talking to nobody because who would even know I was doing a podcast. And here I am, 10 years later with this big giant podcast, and I write books, and people would say like, oh, you should write a book. No, I'm not going to write a book. And then I wrote two, and they've done it. And then people were like, why don't you just become a therapist? No, I'm not going to become a therapist. And so now I did that too. So
yeah. So are you finished with your therapy degree now?
I have like 13 weeks left before graduation, and it cannot come a minute too soon. So clinical work under supervision. So I'm pre-licensed.
Great.
Yeah.
And where are you located?
I'm on Long Island, New York. So I'm seeing clients in New York State right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love it.
So great. Okay, so we're going to be answering everyone's questions about not everyone's. We're going to be answering a very, very small selection of the questions that have been submitted to us about panic attacks. Yeah. But I would like to hear just a little bit more of your story. And I love like the way this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't necessarily buy into when they've been reading a lot of articles on the internet and learning a lot about mental health is I think the general mentality is that when you've been diagnosed with a condition, that condition is thereby kind of permanent for the rest of your life, and you can just kind of cope with it or manage it. Right. And that has not been my personal experience, and it sounds like it hasn't been yours either.
It has not been. Like, I understand that diagnosis is a really controversial topic. I get it. Like sometimes there's stigma attached, there's labeling, there's feelings that come along with those diagnoses. I get that. My personal experience, and therefore, honestly, my clinical belief is that when it comes to this sort of stuff, we're talking about anxiety disorders today, those are not lifelong diagnoses. Like it's a label that labels where you are at the moment, but it does not label you as a person for the rest of your life.
I absolutely agree. I think it's a legitimate, real experience. You cannot just wish it away. It's something you're actually in. You're experiencing this. Other people also have similar experiences, and they're not something that you can just like wish your way out of or just choose to stop feeling that way. Right. But when you have enough symptoms, you qualify for the diagnosis. And when you don't have enough symptoms, when your symptoms decline and go away, you don't qualify for the diagnosis anymore. So I personally do not see, especially diagnoses like depression, anxiety, the most common diagnosis, as permanent conditions.
No, me either. And to be honest with you, even beyond just like the manualized diagnostic criteria, like, oh, these criteria, A, B, C symptoms, do you meet those? I define it more as like the impact of anxiety on my life. Now I'm alive, I'm a human being, so I might experience anxiety now and then. I might even have a panic attack today. I don't know, possible. But anxiety plays zero role in determining how I live my life on a daily basis. So forget the symptoms and the diagnosis. That's the difference now.
Yeah. So like, I think of this as like a boat with a very strong motor. Like you have a direction you're going and you're choosing what's important to you. And anxiety waves come and wind comes and it blows, but you're still pointing in the direction you want to go with your life.
Yeah, that's true. And I think for me, like when I say it was cyclical for 25 years, like, I mean, I tried a lot of different things. Some worked sometimes and others didn't. One of the things I could say for sure is learning how to do things sort of without panicking seemed like, that makes sense. Like you learn how to do things and learn how to not panic and manage that. But then life, the currents, the waves, life happens, pokes through that, crumble, house of cards, setback. Oh no, I panic disorder again. So, going in the direction you want to go in consistently, to me, made all the difference in the world. But that meant going through this instead of around it. So,
and that's going to be a big theme of what we talk about today.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by that. And I can also say, like, I experienced like depressive episodes that were long lasting until I worked wilderness therapy. I was working in this wilderness therapy when I was almost 21 years old, not quite 21.
Yeah.
And I just, it was a life-changing experience for me. Like I got as much therapy as the kids in the program did. And I read some stuff and I healed my relationships with a few people, or my half of a relationship with a certain person.
Yep.
And I have never experienced, like I felt sad and down or worn out or tired or exhausted, but I've never gotten back to the place where I actually believed my depression, or I believed that I was a terrible human being, or that I allowed that to last more than a day or two.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to look at these things, and again, it could be controversial. You don't have to agree or disagree, I guess, but like people always say, well, anxiety disorder is a mental illness or disease. I don't see it that way. And that's why I also don't use the word heal, which is also controversial. I like to use the word learn, because I wasn't broken, and I don't believe anybody watching us is broken. I feel like we learn some bad cognitive habits. We get into avoidant maladaptive responses to the way we feel, but then we can learn new ways, and those things we learn stay with us. So that's why you might experience different mood swings and struggles in life, but you don't believe the depression anymore. Because you learned as part of the process.
And I do want to step back and just say there are biological aspects to both anxiety and depression. And if you look at heritability estimates, some disorders, as they're defined by the DSM, are much more heritable. So you look at autism is up in the 90% heritable. ADHD is much more heritable. Even OCD and some other types of disorders are more heritable. Than you look at the estimates for anxiety and depression, which are in the 30 to 40% impacted by heritability. So I do want to say that there are biological aspects. I'm not trying to deny that reality, but the truth is, with anxiety and depression, there's so many opportunities to learn and grow that with the right skills, I think for vast majority of people, if they are able to consistently learn the right skills, have support and resources while they do it, that for the majority of people, they can experience really a massive improvement in their life quality.
I agree 100%. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So, Drew, give us a brief summary of your life with panic attacks. And,
it was a good time, man. It was really quite a party. The first time, and anybody who's followed along, you've heard me say these things before, but the first time I ever had a panic attack, I was like 19 years old. I was a sophomore in college. Everything was going awesome. It was spring break. I was not partying in Florida. I was home back in the house I grew up in, and I had my very first experience with a panic attack. I had no idea what it was, not a clue. No one ever told me about that. I'd never experienced it before. I was not an anxious person. I was not a fearful person. I was not a nervous person. I was kind of bulletproof, super high achiever, that whole thing. And boom, I had this experience that was absolutely life-changing, because at 19, I interpreted it as, I guess this is it. It's been a good 19 years. This is what it feels like to die. I truly thought that I was experiencing what it felt like to die. That leaves a mark. So
so scary. Yeah.
It was incredibly scary. That experience will stay with me until I do leave the planet, for sure. It's burned into my brain. And I became a textbook example of how that negative experience, really scary, disturbing experience, became itself the problem. So people often say, like, well, what was the root cause of that panic attack? I still don't know. And I never know, but I can tell you that the next panic attack was caused by the first one, because I was so afraid of it happening again that I quickly slid into like the textbook definition of panic disorder. I was hyper avoidant. I was hyper vigilant. I was always looking for signs. And within about 6 months, I slid all the way down that, absolutely developed panic disorder, developed agoraphobia, and that repeated in cycles. So yeah, that was my life with panic for a long time. It was not fun. And I was just generally afraid of my own body and my own thoughts. Not a good place to be.
Totally. Can you just mentioned the cycle that leads to panic disorder. Can you lay that out for us?
Sure. So people think that having panic attacks means you have panic disorder. The panic disorder is not defined necessarily by the fact that you have panic attacks. The disorder is really more defined. Yes, that's part of it, of course, or else it wouldn't be called panic disorder, but it's really defined by the response to those panic attacks. So when you become a little bit fixated or obsessed or overly worried or concerned that you will have another panic attack, and then you begin to implement avoidant and escape strategies that are designed to, got to find out my triggers and make sure I avoid them. I have to find like the food that I ate that may have caused that and don't eat that. I have to only drink certain things. I have to get this much sleep. You try really hard to manage all the variables to try to never panic again. Now that takes over your life, and you have this highly avoidant lifestyle, and things get really nasty, and left unchecked, that avoidance can become agoraphobia.
Mm-hmm.
Become housebound, and they have very limited places that they are willing to go. They need safe people. It's
Yeah.
all driven by the fear of the state itself.
Mm-hmm. Fear of those feelings, or fear of those sensations.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what caused the panic attack? The last one,
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking.
Did you try to do things initially to like calm your body down? Did you try and make yourself not panic? Did you try and make yourself breathe slow, stuff like that?
Sure did. Bullets off of Superman, my friend. So like I always use that analogy.
Yeah.
But you know what? I don't like berate myself for having gone down that. How was I going to know? Like
Yeah,
I had
I think most people do.
no freaking idea. The first thing I did was figure out like what was wrong with my body. I immediately went to a doctor and thought that there was something physically wrong with me. And then I tried to find all the ways to like manage that response and stop it and, prevent it and instantly calm down. And those are not strategies that tend to work consistently or reliably. And so
Mm-hmm.
then you get into that like, oh, nothing works.
Yeah.
Something's really wrong with me. Nothing is working.
I can't make this anxiety go away. I can't make these feelings go away. I can't force myself to not have a panic attack. So I'm broken. I'm screwed because I can no longer control like where I go or what if my life goal is to not panic, then I have to avoid everything.
Or I can control it, but the cost of that is high.
Mm-hmm.
I can never be home alone because I need a safe person in case I panic. I cannot leave the house. I cannot go to work. I cannot go to school. I can't go to social functions. I can't eat certain foods. I cannot watch certain TV shows. That's a really high cost. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I might sneeze just now. I've got like a tickle coming on. Okay. So when it comes to panic, how long, so you said that went on for years? 20 years?
25 plus years of my life.
Yeah.
Listen, it was not, I'm always honest. I'm going to be truthful about all this stuff. I did not suffer from panic attacks every day for 25 years of my life. I didn't.
Yeah.
It was cyclical, believe it or not. When it first hit me, when I was a sophomore in my undergrad days, I was flailing. I went into a pretty deep hole, and I accidentally, through the kindness of some random people in my life, hooked me up with a psychologist who I saw once. You know why I saw him once? Because he handed me a book written by Claire Weeks and said, I know what this is. Read this. I read it twice in 2 days, called him up and said, thank you. I don't need to see you anymore. And as soon as I knew what it was, it kind of went away.
Yeah.
So I used the technique that's just accept it, don't fight it. And I remember reading those books, Hope and Help for Your Nerve, thinking this woman was literally writing to me. She's literally talking to me, and it was amazing. And I kind of used what she said and it went away and then it came back.
Yeah.
And the technique that I thought I had developed for stopping a panic attack failed me. And I went right back down the rabbit hole again. Not good. Yeah.
What did you cut out of your life?
Pretty much everything. So like being alone was NO. Anybody watching that, we call it monophobia. It's not like its own standalone phobia, but that's the word we use for it. Where like, I know I always have to have a safe person around because if I panic, I need somebody who's going to save me from that. Right. I cut out all kinds of foods. I cut out driving. Like there you go. See, that made it better. Oh, Em is also on I see on your iPhone because stupid iOS. Why? I'm frozen now. Can you see that?
You are frozen. iOS broke this.
Because I put my thumb up. Seriously. All right. Anyway.
Hopefully we'll be back soon.
Yeah. Food, drink. I cut a whole lot of things out of my life because I needed to manage my anxiety or whatever. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'll stop my camera and start it again.
Let's see what happens.
Nope. As soon as I put my thumb up, iOS decided, hey, let's show an emoji and freeze the thing.
Are we having fun or what, guys? Live stream.
Emoji is not. You want me to pop out and pop back in again?
I just put you back in the studio, so let's see.
Okay.
Try turning your camera back on.
I'm trying.
All right. I think this is what you're describing, though, is really common experience. I can't see you. I've not had these problems with StreamYard before, but here we are doing a live stream.
I don't use StreamYard anymore, but that's how about I do this? Switch.
Oh, you're back.
There we go. I had to switch my camera and switch it again. Okay.
Thank you so much. So I think most people do. They try to control the panic attacks, and they end up controlling their life instead.
Correct.
They end up cutting things out of their life instead.
Yeah. So I did all the things. I went down that road. Second time, and again, this gets super, listen, I am not pro or anti-medication. You make your own choice. I support you either way. I medicated it away. That worked. Then it didn't. And there were all kinds of unfortunate side effects that came with that. I had to stop doing that. And then I was left with, I was in the same boat. Like I'm still back in the situation where I'm terrified of my own body. I'm hypervigilant, terrified of my own thoughts. I was fixated on existence and death and annihilation. I had that OCD thing grabbed me hard. And yeah, so I had to kind of do it the go through it way. And that was when it ended finally.
Okay. Yeah. So tell us that part. Let's hear it. I want to hear the rest of the story now.
Okay. So in my undergrad days, I got a degree in architecture, but I was always, I went to at the University of Buffalo, which at the time, the School of Architecture had this weird combination of like architecture and applied behavioral scientists that really impacted me. So I became like a behavioral sciences geek, even though I was studying architecture, and I remained one for years and years and years. So I was always interested in cognitive theory, learning theory, all of behavioral theories. I was interested in that stuff. I would read the research papers just because I'm a dork. And so I kind of already knew. And then I had read Claire Weeks, you know, the first time back in the 80s. So I kind of knew what I had to do. And it was like, well, I guess I have to do this. So that became, I have to really get, this is so hard to say because people are like, what is he talking about? I was trying to not panic, but what I really had to learn was how to get really good at panicking. So I just started doing the things that would trigger panic again and again, incrementally and pushing a little further and trying to learn from that. And sure enough, I learned that even if I did panic, I was okay. I panicked and it's over. And I don't have to engineer my whole life around it anymore. So that's in a nutshell. That's what I was doing in a nutshell.
I'm going to ask you a real personal question. When was your last panic attack?
Oh, maybe, I think it's probably going on 2 years now. I know exactly what it was. I had vertigo. I was sick. I was sleep deprived. And
when your whole body system is like,
just done. I was just done. And I remember lying on my living room floor about 2 years ago, and the room was sort of half spinning, you know, vertigo, like a thing with your ears, like real actual vertigo. And I'm like, here it comes. And sure enough, I had a panic attack.
Yeah.
All right.
And so what's your approach now to panic attacks? Describe it in as much detail as you can, like what you do instead and how that's different from what you were doing in the past.
Okay. So when I know, you know, and everybody watching kind of knows that moment where it's building and building and like, here we go. That's it. I've hit the tipping point and it's going to happen. So even as what I would describe as a fully recovered person that has the temerity to write books about this and become a therapist and treat it, like I will get instantly triggered too. That's true. We cannot get rid of that initial, like, you know, so I will have that first like OMG response because it's freaking scary. And like, that's what it's supposed to be. It's designed to be that, right? But now the way I define my recovered state, and I try to define even for my clients and people who follow along with me, is it's the shortening of time between OMG, oh my God, and oh well. So it used to be I would have OMG and that would go on for months. It would never. Now I have the same OMG that everybody watching does. I get that too. My heart pounds and I'm instantly in a sweat and my legs are shaky and I'm derealized and all that stuff. But usually within a minute, I can get to, oh, well, and I just relax into it because the experience tells me that like, yeah, I'm genuinely terrified right now. That's true. That's biological. You can't not be afraid. I hate this. I wish it wasn't happening, but I know that the best thing for me to do about it is literally nothing. And sure enough, I can say with certainty that panic attack is going to probably peak and end within 8 to 11 minutes, somewhere in that neighborhood. I'll be shaky for a half hour because adrenaline and cortisol. I didn't like that it happened. Don't want it to happen again, but I don't think about it after that because I'm not afraid of it anymore. Yeah, I'm afraid in the moment, but I'm not afraid of the panic attack happening again. I don't know if that makes any sense.
So I feel like that's a difference between like a pure feeling, like a pure feeling, and then a secondary feeling, which is like what we think and what we worry about, what we ruminate on, and what we like try to avoid, and what we try to like analyze, and we try and figure out, and we try and make it go away, and we try to control. And that's all like this very cluttered, messy, like it's still emotional, it's still fear, but it's very different than just having a feeling and experiencing that feeling of panic.
It's interesting because if I look back on it, I didn't know I was doing that when I was doing this recovery work, right? So I was accidentally using principles of like acceptance and commitment therapy and metacognitive therapy. So now it's the whole, what I don't do anymore. People that have panic attacks have, I feel, therefore, right? So the feeling comes first, and now you're trying to find meaning in that feeling and find the danger that you think it represents. Usually in life, it's the other way. I feel because. Okay, I am afraid because I'm having a panic attack, not I feel my heart beating, therefore I must be having a heart attack. That's So I understand that that sort of inference machine was backwards, and I just don't listen to it. I don't know if that makes any sense. I was accidentally learned that. I didn't know that's what I was doing. It wasn't habituating to panic. I was learning that, like, oh, it's making me ask questions I don't actually need to ask or answer.
Yeah.
So just let me just let it go.
Huh.
I know.
How long did that process take? Like where you shifted to being good at feeling panic?
Yeah.
Was that an instant or was that a process?
No, it was definitely not an instant. So like I had the best of intentions. I remember the year that I really started doing my recovery work. I was no more medication. I was on my own. That which was scary. Like I wanted off the medication, but also like I got no shield. I got no protection. So there was a lot of trepidation there. And I'm like, okay, I get triggered when I drive. So I'm going to get up every single morning, put my feet on the floor, get dressed, go driving. Cool. Good plan. Right. Except that I was in a panic within like 10 seconds after I got out of bed because I knew what I was about to do.
Yeah.
So I literally started practicing panicking while I was getting dressed and brushing my teeth and combing my hair and trying to drink a glass of orange juice, which I hate, but I thought I was supposed to. It's potassium, good for your heartbeat, right? So you get into all those like rituals, panic rituals. Yeah. And so it was a process of just like, I guess I'll practice again and again and again and again and again. So there was, that is not, that response from a biological or an evolutionary perspective has to be really easy to turn on. That's how we got to the top of the food chain and we're still here. It really has to be hard to turn off or else we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Well, if I could have just believed it's just panic. It's fine. When people tell you that, like anybody watching, it's all in your head. It's fine. It's usually, if I could just believe that, I would have had 25 years of my life back, but we can't do that. So, repeated experiences.
So instead you just exposed yourself to that panic. When I say expose, I mean like exposure therapy.
Yes, that's exactly right. I had to learn how to get better at panicking. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to learn how to not panic.
Yeah, that's what everyone thinks they're trying to do, is how to stop panic attacks. But what you're really learning is how to get good at having panic attacks so that they don't impact you much.
Yeah, because then you're not afraid. If you're not afraid of it anymore, then you have no reason to avoid it. And then the happy secondary effect is they kind of stop. But that's a happy secondary outcome.
This is what's sneaky about our brains, right? If we so you do acceptance and commitment therapy or whatever, that's one of my main models. Yep. And there's this idea that's like, oh, once you stop struggling with your feelings, often your feelings don't hurt you so much. But then your brain's like sneaky. It's like, okay, but if I magically pretend to stop struggling, then can I make my feelings go away? Which is like struggle. Like you're right back on the struggle bus. And then it's like, well, why isn't it working? I'm trying to be accepting to make them go away. And it's like, your brain just like tricked you.
Because I'm accepting to make it go away. Yeah. And I cannot tell you, listen, you have a much bigger audience than I do. I know you hear this every day. I don't understand. I'm like, I accepted. What happened? It didn't work. Mm-hmm. People will, I'm sure you hear that all the time. Well, acceptance, it doesn't work for me. Well, tell me what would it mean if it worked? Well, I accepted. I floated like Claire Weeks said, but the panic attack didn't end. That's not what she said. That's not what I'm saying. It's not what Emma's saying. Mm-hmm. So first you have to define what works means. Works is I learned that I can handle this all the way through. That's what works.
Yep. Yeah. You can feel that panic and you're still okay.
Yeah. And listen, I totally get that if, you might be listening right now to us talk and think that is patently absurd. These people don't know what they're talking about. Clearly, they've never had a panic attack themselves. So I get it. The first reaction to that message is always resistance because who the hell wants to do that?
Nobody wants to do it.
Nobody wants to do that. That's not the way we want to do it. I get that. It's okay if you're resisting it. Totally fine. Yeah. You get there when you get there.
Yeah. Yes. And it's process. You can do your own personal test on this. Like I do believe that like when people are struggling with an issue, they should try something and then they should try something else and then they should try something else and try something else. So if like struggling against panic works for you, then it works. Good. Right. Great. Awesome.
Sure.
And someone just commented, breathing techniques work for panic attacks. And I would say if that works for you, awesome. You probably don't have panic disorder, but if that works for you, that's awesome because slowing down your breathing can stop a panic attack.
Right.
But what do you think about that with panic disorder?
That's it, again, controversial, right? Because, and listen, if you are finding success with breathing technique, I would not take that away from you. Like no therapist would say, stop doing that. You're doing it wrong. Like, okay, you found an adaptation that fits for your values in your life. Go with it. Mm-hmm. Oh shit. Thumbs up again. But the issue is when you try to use breathing as a magic, and listen, there's a lot of, without getting too into it, there's a lot of information out there on the internet that puts breathing as a magic process.
That's right. It will cure everything.
It cures everything. It grounds you. It connects you to the universe. It lets your pain go. Like, cool. I mean, if that works for you, there's nothing wrong with trying to implement that. But when you try to use it as a panic shield or a panic switch, this is how I turn off a panic attack.
Yep.
And it doesn't. Because in that moment, for that panic attack, or in that week, you're just stressed or sick, or your flexibility is not as good, and you need it to be over faster, and the breathing doesn't make that happen. You just shot yourself in the foot, because that becomes it doesn't work. Nothing works. This used to work. I hear that all the time. This used to work, and now it doesn't. What happened?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull out one of my posters really quick. If I can find one of my posters.
Sure.
Where is it? It's behind my bookshelf over here.
I always try and look at.
I just want to talk about this anxiety cycle for a minute.
Oh, I love it. Visual aids.
Yeah. So we generally, I believe our default is a sense of safety. We have some kind of stimulus. Who knows what it is when it triggers a panic attack? And then that interpretation is that this is dangerous.
Right.
This triggers a greater fight, flight, freeze response. And then if we get on the struggle bus, we're trying to avoid it, control it, escape it, manage it, whatever. And that makes us feel better for a second.
Yep.
But then our brain is like, phew, because I escaped or avoided, I survived. I'm going to make my human escape or avoid it again. So I'm going to increase my human's anxiety around this item, around this whatever stimulus it is. And that's going to make them avoid it more, which is going to keep my human alive. Right? Our brain's goal is not to make us happy. Our brain's goal is to keep us alive. Right. But with panic attacks, sometimes the stimulus, who knows, sometimes they just come completely out of the blue. And sometimes it's like, oh, my heart's beating really fast. And that might be dangerous. What if I get anxious?
I feel therefore.
So I feel something going on in my body, something weird, whether it's dizziness, short breathing, fast heart rate. And then we interpret that as being threatening. Mm-hmm. And for people with panic disorder, they develop a belief that panic attacks are dangerous, or they have to be avoided. They're like, dangerous in like, oh, I'm going to die of a heart attack, or dangerous like, this is so embarrassing. What if someone sees me? This
or it's just too much. Just
I can't handle it.
Too much, right? Exactly.
And so then you have a greater cortisol response, right? A greater alerting nervous system response here in response to like, oh, my heart rate is fast. And you're like, that's not good. I feel a little anxious about this. This is threatening. And then what does work when people are able to drop the struggle, drop the struggle, and they're like, it's okay. I'm feeling panic and it's okay. Then slow breathing, if they're not on the struggle bus, slow breathing might help them actually sit with it and face it.
Yeah.
But if you're using slow breathing as a way to control panic, that reinforces this message to your brain that your physical symptoms are dangerous.
Right.
And that increases your fight, flight, freeze response. So that's the cycle we see with panic disorder. Like, I have to make these feelings go away. I have to breathe slower. I have to make my heart rate. And that sends a message to your brain that you're actually in danger. And that's going to increase that cycle and lead to like a longer lasting panic experience.
Sure. Yeah. And one that's more likely to recur, right?
Yes.
To repeat again and again and again and again. It's so paradoxical because especially in wellness circles, you hear it all the time, the breathing techniques, the grounding techniques, put your feet in the grass, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, fine. All of those things do have a purpose and they do serve a purpose in certain contexts. But when they become techniques to protect you from your own natural fight or flight response, that's when things can get a little bit problematic and go off the rails. And it doesn't make sense. It's paradoxical.
And I think if I were to summarize this, like this is what I've been thinking this last 2 weeks is just like every time that your goal is to stop feeling a certain way, you're essentially getting stuck in hedonism, but you're also essentially telling your brain that feelings are dangerous. Every time your life goal is to like make my feelings change, then in general, in the long run, it makes your life worse. And the best way to manage anxiety is to get very intentional about what you want your life to be about instead of making it about what am I going to feel? What am I going to feel?
I agree. But that's hard work. You know, we have to acknowledge that it's not that easy because it doesn't seem instinctual. And the common sense approach would be, no. I have to regulate my nervous system and calm myself down and have techniques. I get it. But if you find that you have been trying that for an extended period of time and throwing all those things at the wall and nothing sticks, well, then this is where this message starts to resonate a little more.
Yep. And just to be clear, I actually really like somatic approaches. Like I really like getting into your body and soothing your nervous system, but you can't do that from a place of struggle. Like there's just like a switch. There's like some kind of switch that's like, I'm willing to feel what I feel, and I'll lean into that gently and allow it to be there, and I'll kind of coax it or guide it. And
Yep.
that's very different from like, I have to make my heart stop beating fast.
Right. I have to manage it. That's not managing it. That's just experiencing it. Right. So
Yeah.
I think it depends. You're right. If you're on the struggle bus, then those things tend not to work. I always like to think is the source of your concern internal or external? If it's external and you know what, your boss is a jerk and like you have money problems and your dog just tore up the sofa and you're super stressed and you're sick. Yeah. Then you understand I'm having an anxious response because because my life is a mess right now. And then those strategies are really good. But if the state itself is the problem,
if you're afraid of what's going on inside of you.
Correct. If it's an internal, no, the problem is how I feel, only how I feel, not why I feel that way. Well, then those techniques begin to backfire a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it. And if the problem is your boss and your dog and your couch and your finances, calming yourself down is great, long enough to get yourself into a place where you're moving into problem solving too.
Correct.
Like we don't want to just manage our feelings. We want to like improve our skills and maybe get a better job or train our dog or manage our budget. And you can't just shift your feelings. You just can't just like control your feelings. I just don't want to feel anxious about these things. It's like,
yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting about people who develop an anxiety disorder, or if we're particularly panic disorder, is what you just said makes perfect sense to everybody, but then they'll put panic attacks in a no-fly zone. Like, yeah, okay, cool, until you get over this line, and then what Emma said doesn't apply anymore. But guess what? It kind of does. In fact, when you learn it in the context of panic attacks, my personal experience, I don't know if you agree with this, the lessons I learned learning how to get really good at panic made my life much better.
Yeah.
Overall.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so let's jump into a couple of viewer questions. The first question I think is really important is, are panic attacks dangerous? Is it bad for your heart to have a panic attack?
No, it is not. So like, you can consult with countless cardiologists who will talk about this. And anybody who's ever run into an ER, or if you're in the UK, A&E, and like you're freaking out and like, oh my God, my heart is pounding and I'm freaking out and I think I'm going to die. And they take one look at you and it's just anxiety. You're having a panic attack, and they send you home, or they give you a Xanax and send you home. There's a reason why they shrug their shoulders and, like, you're fine. It's okay. You're all right. Like, I know it's scary, but you're all right. No, it's not. And one of the more interesting things that people will counter that with, but constantly swimming in cortisol is going to kill me, right? Some of the more interesting current research, which Kelly McGonigal talks a lot about this. She wrote a book called The Upside of Stress. What's interesting is, what's more likely to negatively impact you? Insisting that stress is going to kill you.
Yeah.
Not the stress. It's the way you interpret the stress that seems to be more indicative of possible problems down the road. So if you look at it as that, no, this is definitely killing me and I have to find a way to stop it, as opposed to I have to find a way to adapt and handle it. That's an issue.
So I would agree 100%. You can go, like, the first time you have a panic attack, first 10 times you have a panic attack, go to the doctor, have them look at your heart. If they are telling you like your heart's okay, there's nothing wrong physically.
Right.
I think there's very good evidence that panic attacks are not dangerous, and experiencing stress and anxiety are not dangerous. They're a healthy part of being alive. There is research out there that's showing that chronic stress can be harmful, but the better question is, what's helpful? Like, what is helpful? Does trying not to be stressed, does trying not to have a panic attack help? It does not. So panic attacks aren't dangerous. Stress isn't dangerous. Anxiety isn't dangerous. It doesn't harm you.
Right.
Chronically being in an activated nervous system state for 100 years is going to harm you. But being anxious about being anxious is not going to be helpful. So we got to take you got to step back and be like, okay, this isn't working. Like, trying to be stressed about stress, it's not helpful.
It's so hard, because trying so hard to feel better is the most likely to help you not feel better.
Yeah.
It's frustrating. I hate saying those things.
Yeah. So and this is one thing I do try to constantly emphasize is, like, what do we do instead? It's not just trying to feel worse. It's trying to shift to the life you really care about. You shift your attention to going and doing the things that you really care about instead of just trying to feel better. But that being said, that doesn't mean you have to suffer with panic attacks forever. You can not, like you can decrease the frequency and intensity. They might still come and go, but I really sincerely believe that. And just like I said, like with depression, I experienced depression for 3, 4, 6 months at a time. And now if I experience intense waves of sadness or despair, it's like, a half a day at the most, and that's, I feel like maybe a good chance to reflect on my life and then get back at it.
Sure.
And so it like, I don't, so while I preach acceptance and willingness as a strategy, I don't preach just like, you should just suffer forever.
Yeah, but see, that's where people misinterpret that. And listen, if you're struggling and you feel desperate for relief, I understand why you would hear it that way.
Yeah.
But I did a live stream on my channel, I don't know, about a year ago, trying to clarify that, because people will often say like, well, he's just saying you have to learn to live with it. No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Right.
But as weird as it is, another paradox is when you know that you could live with it, if you had to, then suddenly you don't have to live with it.
Yeah. So that's it. Like you have to go to the places that scare you. You have to lean in to this very, very scary experience. So if you, so the first thing is, panic attack's not dangerous.
Yeah.
It's really important. It's not a heart attack. And there's I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to give medical advice, but you could ask your doctor how they can tell the difference, because they can tell you like some simple things. And I'll hint at one of them. Well, no, I'm not going to. I'm not going to go there. I'm not a doctor, but you can talk with your doctor.
Good move. Nope. Good move.
So panic attacks are not dangerous, and we need to maybe consider not reading so many articles about anxiety being that bad, because I think anxiety serves a great function sometimes. We just
Can I add to that, like our panic attacks dangerous thing? Okay, I hear you guys saying that, and my doctor said they weren't dangerous, but I just in the moment, I can't seem to believe that. Here's one of the things you can maybe hang on to. You only believe after you act like you're safe. The belief does not come before. So when you hear me say like, I can just relax and do a panic attack, I had to do that even when I believed that I shouldn't do that. That's the only reason why I believe it's right now, because I did it before I believed. Really important.
So you're asking people to take an action even if they're not 100% sure.
Right. Because my thoughts and emotions are telling me I shouldn't take that action. But since when are your thoughts and emotions guaranteed to be correct?
That's right. Yeah.
You never said something in anger that you regret. Of course you do. Same thing. Yeah.
And that's that certainty thing where people like, they wait until they're 100% certain before they choose to act in the direction they want to go. And really, that's going to leave you never taking the action that you want to go.
And then judging yourself really harshly. Why can't I get this? I don't understand. I listen to all the podcasts. I read all the books. Why can't I get it? Because you're trying to believe before you act.
Yeah.
Big ask. Anyway.
So you've described a little bit of this process, which is like letting go of the not letting avoidance of panic determine your life. What are the tiny steps you would encourage someone to do as they want to build the skill of being able to feel a panic attack and allow it to come? And I'm gonna let you think about that for a second while I tell a quick story.
Sure.
And so this story was this guy I shared on my YouTube channel a few months ago, and he'd been having panic attacks for 30 years, and he'd read all the books, and he'd done all the things, and he tried all the medicine, and every time he flew, he would have a panic attack. Sure. And he said basically, and he watched my panic attack series on YouTube, and he said, okay, I went on the plane, and I said, you know what? I'm going to try and have the biggest panic attack of my life. Let's go. Bring it on, panic. And he went and sat down in a seat, and he tried to make himself have a panic attack because he decided to take that leap, like the Indiana Jones leap of faith into that chasm. And he said that was the first time in his life he hadn't had a panic attack on an airplane.
When you want to panic, you can almost never panic.
Yeah.
So it's funny because I work with people who, you start to do exposure with them and like, yeah, okay, I'm going to go practice panicking. Like, damn it, I didn't panic. And they're like, I did the exposure wrong. No, you actually did it right because you went in fully willing and asking for it, and therefore you didn't have it. But, yeah.
You put yourself in a win-win. So I've been doing exposure therapy with myself with climbing and like falling, and I'm just scared of falling. And if you say, my goal today is to go get scared, like you're going to win either way.
Oh, that's a good point. That's true.
Because I go and I climb and I get really scared and I take a fall and I'm scared. I'm like, okay, I won. And if I go and I climb and I take a big fall and I'm like, I wasn't that scared, then I won.
That's a good point. If you're willing to go be scared, then you win no matter what happens.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So what would you say to someone who's like in these initial stages? You're telling them, okay, you've got to be willing to panic.
Yep.
How do you break that down into like tiny skills that people can actually act on? Because willingness is kind of this big nebulous thing.
It is you're right. Now, I always address that as this. Listen, everybody listening that's struggling with recurring panic attacks wants to know how to go from the top down. Tell me what to do when I panic. But I'm going to say, well, tell me what do you do when you wake up in the morning? And I will almost guarantee you that a person who has panic disorder or agoraphobia or something like that is going to have a day chock full of tiny little rituals. Well, when I get up, the first thing I do is grab my phone and scroll, and I check out all my anxiety accounts. Okay, why do you do that? Well, because I might, it makes me feel better. Do you need to feel better to get out of bed? Right? Or, I only eat certain things, or I get up and then I have to do this. I have to have my green tea. Okay, well, what if you don't have your green tea? So we really start to look at there are rituals woven in. I was that person. There were rituals everywhere that were all designed to try to keep me calm and managed. And so it's perfectly acceptable to start to experiment. I like to use the word experiment more than exposure. Like, what would happen if you didn't take your magnesium supplement this morning? What would happen? Right. Yeah. Or what would, or do you drink coffee in the morning? Oh, I love coffee, but I don't drink it anymore because, of course, caffeine, you're not supposed to, anxiety. Well, what would happen if you had a half a cup of coffee? What if you experiment with that? So we can really start from the bottom up. You do not have to start with like, I've been on my sofa for 6 months, terrified to leave the house, and I got to get in the car and drive 100 miles away. That is not the way you start this.
Yeah.
Bottom up distress tolerance is a thing because it helps you also build that sense of self-efficacy. Like, oh, I can handle my heartbeat, a little bit for 45 minutes because I had half a cup of coffee. That's excellent practice, as opposed to, I want to start with instructions on how to the full-blown panic. Tell me how to stop that. There are no instructions for that. You learn it from the bottom up.
Yeah. Okay. So initially, like breaking some of your own rules and letting yourself feel uncomfortable just in tiny ways. Yeah.
What would happen if for me, it literally started with what would happen if I open my eyes and immediately put my feet in the floor and get up. My ritual started with wake up and sit there and check to see how I was feeling.
Lay in bed. And
so that I could decide what my day might look like. Oh, it's there. There's the anxiety. This is going to be a hard day. Nope. Open my eyes, put my feet on the floor. What would happen if I do that? Yeah. So
what do you say to people who say, but what if my stomach hurts? What if I get really shaky? What if I have all these physical symptoms? What do you say to people when they are like, but my physical symptoms are so intense?
Sure they
what if I cry? What if I shake? What if I pass out? What if I have these feelings?
The answer to that is that might happen, and they are intense, and they're very disturbing, they're disruptive, and they're scary as hell. I'm not going to try and pretend that they're not. They're not just in your head. They are actual biology, but that's your body doing scared things. Like that's what it's supposed to do when you're scared. It doesn't know why you're scared. It just knows it's time to do those things. So we have to, this is a tough message to deliver too. If you, at some point, you have to at least consider the possibility that there might be another interpretation or another way to go. Because if you dig your heels in and say, no, symptoms are not acceptable, they are too much, then where do you go? You have nowhere to go. Then now you're firmly in the try to manage your body camp, and maybe you make it work. But if that's not working for you, you got to at least consider that maybe there's a different way.
Yeah. And if I were to give people like some practical ways that I've gotten around, so I've had a couple panic attacks. I've been there, and I know the first things I tried to do was like, okay, I've got to make myself not feel this way. I've got to stop. Like, I'm really nauseous. I've got to make this nausea go away. I've got to like make myself throw up so the nausea goes away. I've got to do something. Blah, 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 blah. Right. And instead, if I were to give someone like something to hold on, like a practical skill to try, first thing I would say is like, have you heard of a non-judgmental attitude? So you switch your language from this is terrible, this is awful, this is unacceptable, I can't handle this, to okay, this is, and you use a descriptive language instead. This is uncomfortable. This is fuzzy. This is tingly. This is hot. This is cold.
Right.
You switch from judgmental language to descriptive language. And then the second thing I'd say is like, instead of trying to stop it, get curious. To say, oh, what does this feel like? If I were writing a book on what my stomach feels like right now, what descriptive words would I use? How would I, like, what does nausea feel like? This is curious, and you pretend to be a little like a scientist who's describing something for the first time. And then the third thing I would say is like compassion, like in and out. I just watched In and Out with my kids last night. Have you seen In and Out too?
No, but everybody is begging me to see it. Like, you got to see it. All right, I'll see it.
It's the first movie I've seen that I was like, I think they got that pretty darn
That's
right.
what everybody's saying. Like, they nailed it.
It's like saying, okay, this is like someone in my home or in my family that I don't necessarily like, but I will allow them to be here because they're in my life. Like, the reality is I'm going to allow this sadness or anxiety or whatever it is to be here. And it's like compassion. Like, can I just greet you with compassion? It's not liking or disliking, judging or not judging. It's not like pushing or pulling. It's like, you are here. Can I give you some compassion toward those physical sensations in your body?
Mhm.
And sometimes it can be helpful to put like a hand on it and be like, okay, breathing, like fast breathing chest. Okay, I'm just sending love to my fast breathing chest. And so those are some, like, I think if I were to break it down into like kind of a practical action, those are some of the things I would say. Have you tried it? Those, or would you agree, disagree? It's okay.
Yeah, you know what? Everybody's going to find things that resonate with them. And some people that really resonate, and that's fine. I would support that, right? I would add this: be prepared to suck at everything that Emma just told you to do. And that's part of the compassion. So people will hear that and like, yes, get curious. Like, and these are techniques that we use in like ACT and those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
Describe it, just describe it. Don't judge it. Or I would say it's also okay to say, I hate this, because that's factual.
Mm-hmm.
This is horrible. I can't handle it is an interpretation. So
Mm-hmm.
this is tingly. This is painful. This is wobbly. And I hate this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All facts.
Yeah.
Now let me see if I could describe it like a scientist, like Emma was talking about. And guess what? I'm going to really suck at that because all I want to do is make it go away. But it's practice.
Yeah.
You're trying an alternate response to see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Do you die if you try to experience it the way Emma just said? Is it safe to try it that way and not try to make it stop? Give it a shot.
Try it. Just experiment, right? Yeah, increasing this flexibility around our actions, where I think when people get stuck and trapped in the cycle, they're doing a rigid behavior and they're trying to do that rigid behavior just more. They're like, oh, if I could just control it more.
Yes.
Like, it didn't work that good, so I'm going to just try to do it more. And it's like, let's experiment. Try this, and see what works for you.
It's crazy because that state of fear, that high state of activation, will demand that you do more. No, I need to do more. You actually need to do less, believe it or not. Again, paradox.
And that's hard when you're activated. That's really hard for me. Like when your nervous system is activated and you're like, it's really hard to be like, I'm going to sit still for a second. Or I'm going to keep going. I'm going to put my shoes on when I'm having
whatever I'm doing. That is very difficult because then you're confronted with the sensations and the thoughts that get loud. You're not drowning them out.
So for you, it's not so much about like compassion, curiosity, non-judgmental attitude. It's more like, just do the thing while you're panicking.
No, well, listen, you can't not be about that. Like, it's literally baked into this.
Yeah.
So I agree with you 100%. I am not saying that you shouldn't do those things. I try not to lead with those because my experience is that anxious people will techniqueify that.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Use it as an attempt to control.
Right. Exactly. So I always just try and say, like, let's just try something different. Are you willing to like take a little leap of faith, try something different, see what you can learn from that? Baked into that process is patience, flexibility, and it has to be self-compassion, because I will always say, and if you suck at this and you get caught back up in the cycle and wind up calling 911 and going to the hospital, you didn't fail. It's okay. That's going to happen to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Love it. Okay. I've got a few more questions from this. What if someone is afraid of being in a public situation and having a panic attack and being embarrassed? They're afraid they might poop their pants, or they're afraid they might pass out in a public situation. What would you tell them?
Yeah, this is the answers that people really hate. Like, one of the principles that clearly you rely on too, theoretically, so we're in agreement on that, is that sometimes we have really negative experiences. We do not get to demand to never feel embarrassed, to never do something. We could demand it if we want, but let me know if that's working out for you. So most of the time people would say, oh, well, I'm really afraid that if I panic, I'll be embarrassed in public because I'll make a scene. And the common response will be, oh, it's fine. No one's looking at you. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But more so, I would say, well, even if they are looking at you, that means you will be uncomfortable for a variety of reasons for some period of time. Can you allow that? If you cannot allow that, what is your solution? What's the alternative then?
I like that. Because
It's not what if.
if you were counseling me, I'd say,
Yeah,
well, I can control where I go. I can stop going places. I can
correct.
try to control my symptoms. I
Yep.
can try to force it, or and how will that impact my life? Well,
And then my answer would be, I would ask, is that workable or not workable for
yeah, and I
you?
would say that's not acceptable for me.
Yeah, right,
I need
exactly.
to live my life.
A good key that I would see use for almost any question people are going to ask us is, it's not what if, it's even if.
Mhm.
Even if this happens, I can
Yeah.
handle this. Yeah.
Ooh, I like that.
Yep.
So what if my panic attacks come back? Even if my panic attacks come back, I'm gonna keep living my life. I'm gonna keep going places. I'm gonna choose to keep
Sure.
going places.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's see some other questions. Oh, let's do the driving thing. Everyone wants to know, what about panic attacks when you're driving?
Oh, that was my jam, man. Driving was, that was most of my exposure. First off, was that I got to drive, because I couldn't go more than, I don't know, 60 seconds from the house. And even then I would sometimes panic in the driveway as I was pulling away.
Mhm.
So here's the thing, and this is where people will want to argue with me, and I do get it. It is okay to pull over. If you think you have to, you are allowed to make that choice. There is no wrong here.
Mhm.
But we have to at least be willing to challenge the assertion that the panic incapacitates you.
Mm.
So I have panicked and driven in the most skillful way to get back home as quick as I possibly could. So if you have ever had a panic attack while you were driving and you got yourself through 6 lanes of traffic onto the shoulder, off the highway, and back to your house at high speed like a Formula One driver, tell me that you were incapable of driving the car. But even if you do say, no, you don't understand, this is dangerous, I lose my ability to drive, pull over
Yeah.
and navigate through the panic there. Where it ends is very important. If you say driving anxiety means I must go home to make it end, then we're out of options for
Mhm.
addressing your driving anxiety. Pull over if you have to, but
Yeah.
navigate through it there.
So some more flexible options would include driving anyway, pulling over, having the panic attack in your car, and allowing yourself to sit through it and sit through the
Correct.
while that panic attack happens. It includes trying gradual exposures that aren't necessarily about never panicking, but they're like, how far can I drive today? Or
Yeah,
how, like, they're more goal oriented instead of feeling oriented. Like,
that's true.
I'm going to see if I can get to something 30 miles from here or 1 mile from here, whatever it is that's in your like
Yep.
exposure hierarchy. And you say, maybe it'll take me 6 hours to drive a mile, and I'm going to just like sit with it. Now that's a pretty intense
Yeah.
exposure. I'm not necessarily recommending that,
At a
but I'm saying
6 hour exposure.
like, yeah, that'd be a really intense exposure.
Yep.
I'm not saying you start with that. Maybe you start with a 10, like a 1 minute exposure, a 5 minute experiment. I like the word experiment, a
Yeah.
10-minute experiment, but you make it not about like, as soon as you make it, like, I'm going to do this until I feel scared, you tell your brain, please turn up the anxiety as loud as possible.
Yeah.
And you say, instead, I'm gonna stick with this for 10 minutes. I'm gonna stick with this for 1 mile.
Yep.
And I'm gonna stick with this for 10 miles, whatever you're like, you build the exposure ladder and build that out. But those are more flexible ways of thinking than saying, I'm gonna go unless I have a panic attack, or I'm gonna go unless I feel anxious.
Yeah. And again, bottom up is a thing. Like for me, I was panicking on the surface streets, like the local streets in my neighborhood, which you
Mhm.
could argue, and we would probably all agree, it's less traffic. You're at a low rate of speed.
Yeah,
If you're having panic attacks in the car, you don't have to start on the Autobahn.
that's right.
Like, I had to work up to the Long Island Expressway.
And I think as soon as we think of doing exposure therapy, at least for me, when I was doing it with climbing this last winter, the only thing I could imagine was taking these 15-foot falls. Like, that's the only thing I could imagine. Well, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do exposure therapy. And then I forced myself to do the exercise, write out my exposure ladder, and I'm like, oh, I could start with 1-inch falls. I could start with 1-inch falls. So I did. I went to the gym and I did 10 1-inch falls. And I was like, cool, I accomplished my goal today. And I went back home. The next week I went back to the gym and I did like 6-inch falls. And I was
Sure.
like, okay. And
Sure.
the first three felt scary every time. And, but I did 10. And by 4, I'm like, okay, this is not so bad. By 5, I'm getting bored. By 6, I'm getting quite bored, you know? And so it's like repetitive. It's like important to like repeat tiny exposures over and over again.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. Also, you will find, generally speaking, as a principal, because people will hear that and say, that's crazy. It's going to take me 6 years to learn how to drive 50 miles. Not really, because believe it or not, those experiences, if you learn that you didn't learn how to not panic, you learn that you can handle what you feel when you drive, they become generalizable and you tend to accelerate in your progress. I can't
Ooh,
guarantee how fast, but that does happen.
I loved hearing that in your podcast on your agoraphobia episode where you said, people think, oh, now I have to do exposures for the bridge and I have to do exposures for the store and I have to do exposure for everything. It's like, no, you're not actually afraid of the store. You're afraid of your feelings.
That's right.
So you just need to get exposed to experimenting with your feelings and good enough at.
And it's interesting because when you're working with somebody on this, it's like, no, you don't understand. Like I don't care what the exposure is. I frankly do not give a crap what the exposure is. I only care about what triggers your fear. Mm-hmm. So whatever that is, we'll use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I see someone here mentioning like, oh, I've got to check traffic reports before I leave the house just so I won't be stuck in traffic. And it's like, we could make a list 10 pages long of the creative ways our brain tries to avoid feelings. Yeah. Try to avoid those sensations. And that includes any type of control mechanism, any type of planning, avoiding, controlling, lining things up, creating backup plans, including support people, taking like certain substances. Like we are using all sorts of mental habits like rumination, blame, judgment, anger, like distraction. We could go on for 50 pages, right? All of these are control techniques that are a form of avoidance that tells our brain that your feelings are actually dangerous and makes your brain increase your anxiety levels. So I would just say that's an example, like got to check the weather, got to check the traffic report. Like, oh, that's a form of control that will increase your anxiety in the long run.
Right. And it basically rewards your brain for telling you that driving is unsafe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It rewards it's a rewarding type behavior. So it reinforces your anxiety in the long run. And that's why panic disorder and anxiety disorders can feel very paradoxical, because what works in the short term, what feels good in the short term, and what works in the short term is gonna usually increase anxiety in the long run. So you have to be really
I would say it's a really creepy deal, but it's a deal we got.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we got to trust that our brains aren't out to get us. We just have to learn how to we just have to learn some different ways to interact with ourselves and our feelings.
And again, there's that willingness to open up a little bit to consider, because that I have to check the traffic report. Well, what would happen if you didn't? Well, then I might get stuck in traffic. Mm-hmm. Oh, so is the insistence that can never happen? If you're not willing to at least consider the possibility that you might be able to experiment with that, then where do you go? You're out of options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. ACT calls that creative hopelessness. It's like, let's just realize that what we're doing over and over again, like, let's just be honest about, is that working? Is that working for you?
Right. Exactly.
We don't have a lot more time. Yeah. This person has a great question, which I think you already answered, but I want to use this example. They say, Jessica says, I have agoraphobia and I was told to get out more, exposing myself to my fears. But I get triggered by too many people and I feel like I'm going to pass out. I want to learn how to stay calm before and during I expose myself to my fears. So basically she's saying, I want to feel calm first and then I'll do the exposure.
Right. But remember, early on, I said, well, I had to learn how to panic while I was brushing my teeth so I could go out and panic in the car. Mm-hmm. So I know that, listen, Jess, I want you to feel better too. And I want you to be calm, but that's the tough spot. That's a hard ask of yourself. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me how to be calm so I can go practice what? Being calm?
Not having feelings.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Not having feelings.
Doesn't work that way.
Yeah. My goal is to not have feelings.
Yep.
Usually does that work? Is that working in your experience?
Yeah. Or if it's working, what is the cost?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Yep. What's the cost?
Yep.
Another question I have for you is, do you think, and we've got to wrap up. We're like over time, aren't we? You probably got sessions coming up or something. Huh?
Well, I have one shortly. Yeah.
You got what?
I have one shortly. So, but we can do another 5-10 minutes. That's fine.
Do you think, with panic attacks, I was talking to an ER doctor yesterday who was saying, she thinks it's kind of like, the overflow valve, or like a soda bottle that, like, your anxiety in a lot of areas in your life can add up, and then at some point it pops off and you can't really put it back in once it's popped. Yep. Would you agree with that analogy, and that, like, managing your general anxiety can help decrease the frequency or severity of panic attacks?
Oh, 100%. If you are just like a regular normal person and not in a disordered state, and you're having panic attacks sometimes, which amazingly, there are people who will have 5 or 6 panic attacks in the next year and not develop a disorder. That is more common, to tell you the truth. Yeah, then trying to, like, do stress management. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think in general, improving our overall health is going to improve our overall ability to be resilient, or to even like we need an internal level of resources and energy to do exposures. Like you have to have a little bit of energy. So it's like, well, you gotta take care of yourself.
Yeah, it's never a bad idea to take care of the body you were given. Never. There's no reason never to do it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
For sure. Okay. I feel like I could talk with you forever. It's been awesome. Do you have any last thoughts or any other things you'd like to say or address?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess the one thing that I try and end with usually is like, if you've been trying so hard to find a technique to make it stop and you're feeling like nothing works, it might be time to at least consider the possibility that there may be a different way.
Mm,
You're not going to fully embrace it today, and that's okay. You get there when you get there, but
mhm,
don't see yourself as broken.
mhm.
I hate that.
I love it. Yeah, and get creative, and willing to try stuff that seems really counterintuitive. So
Yeah, it makes no sense till you do it. Then it makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
Yep.
awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Drew. Can you tell us where we can find you? Tell us the names of your books. Hold them up if you have them, whatever you want.
This is crazy because I usually do not have them on my desk because I'm terrible at this stuff. But like, I wrote this book called
Slide it in.
The Anxious
There
Truth.
it is.
I wrote this book, which is called 7% Slower. This is a friendlier, faster read. Here's a spoiler alert. This is actually a mindfulness book on the down low, but
Okay.
it uses the technique of going slower to kind of manage that stuff and bring your stress levels down. And just hop on over to theanxioustruth.com. Here on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, just search for The Anxious Truth and you'll see me there.
Awesome. We'll definitely tag you on that too. So
Cool.
cool. Thank you, Drew,
Yeah,
so much for
appreciate
being
it.
here. And thank you, everyone in the audience who came to. Appreciate your comments and
Yep.
your engagement. So,
Hang in there, everybody.
okay. Thanks,
Out.
everyone. Take care.